I got delayed in a plane from Nagpur. Anyway, but I had the opportunity to read the manifesto. Thank you, Marco. This session is really South Asian perspective on European Union elections. I'd just like to say that there are a lot of similarities between European Union and Union of India. We talk of South Asia as well. But European Union is by far the best example of integration in the current politics of the world. And it's a difficult process as well. But by the time the rest of the world was beginning to understand the European Union process, it has imploded. So we'll have to again keep our antennas high to understand what is happening in the European Union. But it's a very important election. We are here to discuss the status and the future of European Union in the context of the current elections and the manifestos that have been circulated by Vijay Pratap. You have heard both the presentations, so we would invite now comments, observation, and intervention, not just to the panel. Oh, you, okay, oh, she can come in, yeah. To the panel, but you could share your perspective as well. So the floor is open. We start with
very short comment that, as I've gathered from Marco, he said nothing is happening good or well for democratic process in this European process, European Union. And so it is also in India. So perhaps nothing is happening good in democratic process either in India or in Europe. Please continue.
My name is Ronja Sengupta. I work with an organization called Third World Network, and we monitor a lot of global policies. I'll mainly kind of respond to Professor Sachdeva's presentation. Thank you for a very rich and fascinating presentation, and I hope Vijay Pratapji will make available the soft copies of the presentation for us. One is about the financial regulation. I mean, I was happy to see, but both the socialists and the Green Party at least have included financial regulation, because I think a lot of the problems, even with the pigs, etc., actually started from a lack of regulation of the financial sector, and it went into real estate and into very speculative activity, etc., etc. So that's good to see. I work on trade investment issues, so I would just like to pick up some of the issues that you had raised in the manifestos. And first is about the Lisbon Treaty, giving the mandate to the European Union as a whole to negotiate trade and investment agreements. And in terms of investment agreements, first I would like to highlight that for India that has actually been a much more of a challenge, because the EU is now negotiating as a 27-member bloc, and we have investment treaties, bilateral investment treaties with 22 European individual member countries. And what these investment treaties provide is very strong protection for the foreign investor. And you mentioned the investor-state dispute settlement system, which comes in many free trade agreements in the investment chapters and also in the investment treaties. What it means is that corporations, mainly who operate across borders, so any foreign company who is a foreign investor which is coming and investing in India, can take our government to court for any perceived loss in their profits in international arbitration courts, and these are secret cases. India has already lost 2 cases. One is the famous Enron case, and when recently they challenged Vodafone on taxes, and when the 2G result was given by the Supreme Court, 7 corporations actually has taken the Indian government to court using these bilateral investment treaties, because it gives the because in the WTO the companies cannot take governments to court. Only governments can take other governments to court. But under these investment agreements and investment chapter in FTAs, this is a very, very dangerous thing for countries where regulation is not complete, like in developing countries. So for example, if we want to regulate, say, a labor law, we want to improve our labor law tomorrow, a foreign company will see it that their profit has gone down and they can take Indian government to court. And there's a Supreme Court decisions of the legislature, everything can be challenged by transnational corporations. And what the EU wants now to negotiate, when they are negotiating on the EU-India FTA, under the investment chapter, and now the Lisbon Treaty gives them that mandate to negotiate for all 27 member blocs. And they want protection at the highest level, which is our bilateral investment treaty with Germany. And we, all members, currently do not enjoy that level of protection for foreign investors, but if we have to give EU what they want, all 27 member states as a bloc will enjoy that level of protection. This can be very, very dangerous for regulation and policy making in India. On the trade issues, you say the WTO, yeah, it is true that EU is not pushing the multilateral stuff so much at the WTO, but the Doha round is by no means over. Bali was just like a, kind of soft first package kind of thing, and they now, as Eduardo wants to conclude the Doha round, EU is very much active, and they have got, they supported the USA in getting, for example, the trade facilitation package at Bali, which is again, like many developing countries have a major problem with that. And what the EU is doing, and I mean the developed countries together, is they are pushing plurilateral. So they have the Trade in Services Agreement, they are pushing International Technology Agreement 2, ITA 2, and the ITA 1 has been very, very damaging for India. They have launched recently at the World Economic Forum a discussion on environmental goods, a kind of plurilateral agreement on environmental goods. Again, this is going to be quite a problem for developing countries to deal with. So I think EU's role in both multilateral, I wouldn't say it's dead or it's not, because what the EU has got some of the things it wanted out of the WTO. What they don't want is agricultural subsidies negotiations to go further. You know, India and the other G33 countries, they wanted the developed country subsidies, and EU gives huge subsidies under the Common Agricultural Policy, the CAP, which they politically also, I think it's difficult for them to reduce. But the fact is that they are limiting subsidies that developing countries can give, even, for example, on our public procurement. So the subsidies we give were challenged by USA, EU, many developed countries, whereas they give huge subsidies. And they do not want these rules to be challenged, and therefore they wouldn't want WTO to go forward, because those rules, now developing countries are beginning to challenge those rules. It's good to see that the Green Party and the Socialists clearly said that they don't want the transatlantic agreements. With the USA, they have launched talks, and with Canada here. In fact, I think in Canada also there's a lot of apprehension about this agreement. I think a lot of it has also to do with the intellectual property rights, etc., and both the systems conflict, etc. Interesting, you said that these parties are saying no to investor-state dispute provisions in these agreements, whereas they are pushing these in their agreements with developing countries. So there's a really lot of double standards in EU positions, and also in positions of political parties who've been allies of civil society organizations in developing countries. I mean, you also said that civil society organizations in several developing countries, including in India, and I've been part of that, we have had several problems with, for example, the proposed EU-India FTA, because of the intellectual property rights that will make medicines much more expensive, because of what it will do to agriculture, because they have huge agricultural subsidies, and they want our agriculture market to be just opened to them, like all segments of agricultural markets, and there are problems with government procurement. I mean, there are several problems, and we are not even sure whether we are going to gain anything from the service chapters also. But it is disappointing to see that they have been, the Green Party, for example, we've done studies with them, we've presented at the European Parliament, which was hosted by Ska Keller. I mean, she's the member of the Trade Committee. But if there's nothing in the manifestos, it is disappointing. It says that there is what? A value-added foreign policy or something like that, right? So I don't know what that means actually. So the thing is that the fact is that the European Parliament has the power to ratify trade agreements, but we don't know. I mean, since you're saying the composition is not going to change, and we have met with many, the Socialist Party, the Social Democrats were here, etc., with many of them. Even if the composition changed, probably European Parliament is not in a position to reject the EU-India FTA if it were to be concluded by the European Commission, because they are themselves, they want the access to Indian markets. Indian market gives them a very, very lucrative, very growing market, and they cannot probably afford to kind of, lose access to that. So they, even if they reject the Canada agreement and they did reject ACTA, etc., they've taken development-friendly positions before, but I am not sure they will be able to afford to do that for the EU-India FTA, even if it went through, with very, very bad provisions on intellectual property rights, investment, and services and agriculture. That's one. Quickly, one thing is, you said human rights. I think you said that human rights has been mentioned. What the EU does, especially in trade, right? So what the EU's view of human rights in trade agreements is to put in a sustainable development chapter where they talk about labor and environmental standards. But what developing country governments see it as non-tariff barriers, but even civil society, what they see is the EU's failure and the European Parliament's failure to also see how they will use human rights. There are extraterritorial obligations that even European Union cannot cause damage to other countries. That is, there are international human rights obligations on that, and that has not been, I think, used enough. So while the Sustainable Development chapter, yes, it is a very controversial issue, but there hasn't been enough discussion of accountability of what Europe wants from their trade agreements with developing countries, what it does to human rights, there, and how then you will invoke EU's extraterritorial human rights obligations. So I think I would have been happy to see some detailed discussion of how they see human rights, how it should be framed in trade agreements. And quickly, migration. I think you said that the EPP will definitely discourage migration, right? They are facing unemployment problems. I can understand that they are in the middle, and really continuous economic crisis. But migration is, for example, the EU-India FTA for India Mode 4 in services trade liberalization, which is basically about migration, about people moving to EU to work, to get jobs. It is a very limited definition. It's limited to skilled professionals for temporary movement. But these kind of, I can quite imagine that this will further discourage the European Union from giving India or developing countries any concession on Mode 4 and migration. And that, I think, will be a major, major problem for the FTA, because for India, that's just one of the very few kind of positives from the agreement. They really want that Mode 4 to be opened up. So I'm not sure whether, so this whole discouragement, EU has it. EU is very cautious about migration policies, but if it is like, really kind of more severe turn, you have more stricter provisions on this, then it will actually really discourage. I think it will actually worse for the EU. Thanks. Sorry for taking too much time.
Yeah. Thank you. One moment. Thank you, Ranja. Let's understand decide on the format a bit, because we have 20 minutes. So I don't think Professor Sachdeva is campaigning for any European political party. So let's not put him on the spot. It is our understanding of the manifestos that we have read them. So it is not the panel versus the audience. I think we'll take contribution from everybody. Since they made the presentation, we'll give them the last word. But it is not. It will not be bilateral. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I know, that's right. So it is all our understanding of the manifesto and our perspective on the European Union in view of the election that is taking place. Yeah? Okay.
Okay, just...
yeah.
See, she has already made the context clear on migration. Indian money moves to Sweden, even tinier countries. But Indian worker, skilled or unskilled, cannot move. So, as a solution, should India not link its trade policies, foreign trade policies, with immigration, including with USA, and these are big countries, Canada and all. It should be part of a policy. Number two, about Sweden, you said that Europe has dimmed its memory about war. But I find Sweden has been warning and taking even some steps, I think. Dr. Giri will know more, because I had an opportunity to talk to certain Swedish politicians through him to talk about these things. So they have been warning and preparing, and even now I think they have started preparing for after Ukraine crisis, defense preparation, etc. So on these two questions, I think you have thought much more.
we have about 35 minutes time, and now that is on, go strictly by law, but we can be flexible on that account. So we have 3, 4, 5, Philip, Soumya, Jiten Sharma, Ritu Priya will, Jiten Ji, sorry. Then Philip, Soumya and Ritu Priya, after their intervention, I would like to take the panelists to respond if they like to, and we have a very knowledgeable co-chair of this area, so he will finally sum up those things. So I invite Philip or Soumya, whosoever maybe, come forward to make intervention.
Let's see.
Yes, sir. Sir.
Thank you very much. So, I understand I have a few minutes only to say a few words. On behalf of the French Socialist Party, I'm a volunteer in this party. I'm not I'm volunteer. I've been volunteer for many years, and I am following, of course, the European election. So I just would say 2 or 3 things. First, it's a very decisive moment for Europe and European Parliament. Why? Because since the Lisbon Treaty, European Parliament has been given a wider role, and the European Parliament is entitled to elect the future President of the Commission, which is something new. Here it's a bit, it's clear in the treaty. Now the situation which will emerge from the election has to be clear. That's the trick. If we have a majority, a clear majority, it could be, as you said, ESP majority or EPP majority. I mean, not majority, at least leading parties. If we have a clear constitution, then the president of the Commission will be the leader of those 2 parties, one or the other. And we have 2 contenders. One is Martin Schulz, German president of the Parliament at the moment. He is the one leading the ESP campaign. And the second contender is Juncker, Mr. Juncker from EPP with Luxembourg. So we have those 2 contenders, and if one of those 2 parties or coalition wins clearly, then the chief of state would be obliged, in a way, to select, to pick up one of those 2 as president of the Commission. If it is an unclear situation, and maybe it will be an unclear situation, I mean without clear majority, then the chief of state will retain, as they did last time, the right to choose the president of the Commission. It was, and this would not be a good situation, because in the last time they just picked up weak persons, and the foreign and the chief of state are fully responsible of one of the weaknesses of the Europe at the moment, which is the fact that the leaders of Barroso one side, Van Rompuy on the other side, and Lady Ashton on the other side are relatively low-profile persons, and they are fully responsible for that. So we do hope that the majority will emerge from the election, and that strong leaders will emerge from those elections. It could be Martin Schulz, our favorite, we are campaigning for him, or it could be Mr. Juncker, but at least there will be good, strong personalities. That's one thing, and this would be a good response to the fact that it is often said that there is a kind of democratic deficit in the European Union, and this would be the right response to this so-called European democratic deficit. Second point I would like to make is regarding economic situation. I think there is a kind of shift just for the moment. Currently in Europe, a shift of ideas. Now it is relatively recognized and even IMF is recognizing also that we have gone, when I say we, I mean the European government have gone so too far with budget cuts, with so-called austerity measures, and this as a balance between fight against deficit and stimulation of growth has been very unbalanced and in favor of defense budget cuts. And this has led to this to kind of almost a recession and now slow growth. There is a kind of shift of ideas those days in Germany also, and due to the coalition, now since German is led by a coalition, SPD, the Democrats, Christian Democrats. So in Germany, in many, even in some circles in Europe, so it is said that there will be, we have to give more impetus to growth and less, maybe we have to slow down about defense cuts. It's a huge debate, and there are a lot of controversy between economists, but there is a shift of ideas, which is a good thing. And the last point I would like to make is relatively to, I would say, the kind of identity issues in Europe. Identity. The identity because of the enlargement, which has been, in a way, extremely ambitious, very generous, but ambitious, and maybe we have underestimated the second, we have a lot of clandestine immigration. This is a very emotional thing. We have to think that every night, hundreds, for not saying thousands, of people are just landing in Sicilia, in south of Italy, in Greece, in Turkey, crossing the Mediterranean, coming from Syria, from Libya, from Africa. Thousands. A lot of them get drowned in the sea also, but a lot are landing, and then they go by train everywhere. And so clandestine immigration is a very difficult, extremely difficult, human subject, but at the same time it creates a lot of emotion, and this idea that Europe is like a siege fortress with people coming from all over, and now coming from Ukraine. They just cross the border to Poland, which is extremely easy, and they just go to the rest of Europe through Schengen, regulations. So identity is really an issue. Just imagine that Scotland is just seeking to be independent, which is just incredible. Or Catalonia. They want, same time, Europe unite, and at the same time, they are got fragmented in a way. And this reflects this identity. People don't want to be merged into a big melting pot. They want to keep their identity, regional identity, languages, and so on. So we should not underestimate these identity problems in Europe. So we will not go further. So those 3 points. One was fighting against democratic deficit. Second, shift in economic thinking. Third, we have to tackle this immigration issue, identity. And now we will see 25th May night, in the evening, the end result. And my guess is that, well, you have projected numbers. I've not seen the numbers exactly, but I think that it will not be that different from the existing parliament. I think EPP will come ahead. I think so, unfortunately. ESP will be strongly behind, and maybe we have the Green, coming in also. And certainly the new factor will be the fact that the extreme right, the Eurosceptics, and all the extreme left of Eurosceptic also will be much more important. It will, I think, go to maybe 90 members, and this bloc will be, this bloc is just looking for destruction. So that will be an issue for the next parliament. And I must say that in France itself, we are fearing that the extreme right will come first. come first, followed by, the no more right, and then we come third. That we have to fight for being second, but we fear, I must say, that we fear that the French extreme right will emerge as the most important party at this election, in favor of a very low turnout also, which is another issue.
Thank you. Before I request our another speaker, Soumyaji, to share his views, I would like to have an unpleasant duty to remind all the honorable speaker that we have 5 to 7 minutes for intervention by an individual, then because the panelists would also like to respond. So I request Soumyaji to share his views.
I'll take within 5 minutes. I just wanted to highlight a very uncomfortable feeling while looking at the manifestos of major European blocs and also the Greens. In fact, though the Green Manifesto also mentions the current economic model is not sustainable and all, but the manifesto itself, whatever I have seen, and apart from seeing the manifesto, whatever discussions I had the opportunity of talking to around 5 to 6 European members of parliaments earlier in Warsaw or in Tunis, there are two things that's very clear, and I am talking about talking in the perspective of what is the theme of today, this deepening of democracy globally. But we are not talking about deepening of democracy within Europe. So in this, the most disappointing, and I'll keep my point targeted, most disappointing thing is that though the Europe, it's understandable, as Ranja also says, since there is an economic crisis in Europe, the most of the debate is around that crisis and how to come out of that. But it's very clear that all the parties, including the Greens, are not really questioning, and as Marco rightly just hinted, or what this way out of this economic crisis will be. Both the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, or center, right of center and centrist, you can say, are focusing on growth-oriented solution to this crisis. And that's the whole focus of economic policy there. Even the Greens, when we talk to them, or even in the manifesto, the Greens are really not talking about looking at this crisis as one opportunity, because whatever we say, the economic growth-oriented solution to this developmental crisis is nothing but waging a war on nature. And that has been the history of this kind of development throughout the last century or more. So on one hand, even the Greens, which are supposed to give an alternative model on this, on what Europe should do, or what a society which grew or which created its development on extraction of natural resource, on going out of their own territories, and in fact lessening the democratic opportunity in other countries or other continents. So basically that is the most disappointing aspect from someone who's outside the EU, who is outside the US, and looking at the whole debate that is happening. Because even now, the major parties within Europe, and same thing, of course, I am not saying that the same debate in the same tone is not happening in India. If you look at the manifestos of BJP, Congress, and even major parties, it's the same kind of emphasis. But since now we are talking about the European manifestos, the major blocs, it's the same kind of disappointment, because they already have a kind of level where the human requirements are met to a certain extent, which cannot be said to be true in many other countries which are called developing or least developed, which cannot be true. But even standing at that point, they are unable to see this crisis as an opportunity to turn back, to see what kind of other development they can do. And in this, I just wanted to mention that development, quote unquote, because development has many connotations, can be seen from two different aspects. One is this basically, which has every political party there in Europe or in India looking at it, is growth oriented. The other could have been easily redistribution oriented. Because when you don't grow, you still have tremendous inequities, you still have enough resources, tremendous resources. And the development can happen based on redistribution, based on equity. So it's a disappointment, quite a disappointment, that none of the major blocs in Europe, and then since we are talking about European elections and European debates, has been able to see this as an opportunity. Of course, it's understandable that raising this will be quite unpopular in the beginning to the people who are facing an economic crisis. But that's what people like Greens are supposed to do, because they by any chance And if we go by this, of course, there is by the projections that Professor Sachdeva has shown, the left, Social Democrats are going to increase a little bit from the earlier position. So Greens by themselves have absolutely no chance of coming into power. They have to tag on to somebody else. So they had an opportunity to raise these issues which are more fundamental than the immediate addressal of the difficulties of the economic crisis, and go towards a direction which can address this over a much longer term. So that has been missed. And just one point, what Professor Sachdeva was presenting, I came in probably a little late, but still I was quite impressed with the presentation. But one point that I would raise as a question, that you mentioned about, you showed some pictures of devastated Europe of the Second World War, and you mentioned about how Europe was grown, and probably this period is also a transition into a more unified economic policy and economic entity. But I would like to ask on this point, because at that point of time, the US was a very fast rising, growing economy, and US came out with a lot of plans, including Marshall Plan. Now you don't see anything possible like a Marshall Plan. So how do you see that the Europe can grow in that fashion with the present crisis and come out of this with that kind of, it's a parallel, drew a parallel. I don't see a parallel possible at this kind of economic scenario now. So that's my question to you.
Thank you. We have Ajay Mehra ji here, Professor Ajay Mehra. Would you like to?
I don't know. I came very late, so.
Still coming in the grip. Okay. So we have so after Soumya ji, Ritu Priya would like to share her views.
Well, I'm really very hesitant to speak because I've not been looking at the European Union and its processes and the trade issues either to the extent that many friends like Ranja and others have. I've also been through the manifestos, but that was some time ago and I have not. But what I would like to just flag are issues that I can see from a public health angle, and they do not find much mention in the manifestos at all. Both in terms of what one observes, with a very superficial level of what's happened in Europe itself, and to what is the issues for us in South Asia. Recently, I just looked at some data on maternal mortality. Something like the UK, there is a doubling of maternal mortality rate in the UK in the last 20 years. There seems to be no discussion on a figure like that. And that was the rate still, of course, is much lower than the developing countries, but the fact that there should be a reversal of their improvements in health is something which is serious enough, and it would be not only a consequence of EU as such, but the various processes that have happened. And it's difficult to say, is it the recession, or could it be contributed to by the drawback of subsidy of the inputs into welfare? So, whichever, or the health services themselves, the NHS and its decline. So, whatever of these, but there is something happening there. The other, just again as an observation, the consequences of when I was in Finland in 2008-9, I think the rules of the EU required that taxes on alcohol are pulled back. And the taxes on alcohol in Finland were one way of controlling alcoholism and its fallout. And thereby there was immediate consequence of increasing deaths and disease from alcohol-related diseases. So, that was the EU law, and Finland then responded by flouting what the EU's requirement was and putting back the taxes to the rates they were, because the public health crisis was clearly seen as a consequence. So these are some which are just observations, and I don't know how far they have still sustained or whether correctives have been made within the EU system. For South Asia and for India specifically, the pharma industry and health services are both areas which are very important areas in trade today, and FTA and WTO consequences which are there, but I'm not the person to really speak on that. One can see that those are very serious areas of concern. One area which the EU has been debating and is still not final, I think, but there is a ban on export of Ayurvedic and other indigenous medicine drugs from India. The clause that has been applied is that it should be a drug which has been used for at least 30 years in a European country. Now that's something